On a grey afternoon on a stone bridge that crosses a rushing river, a millionaire businessman in a dark blue suit holds a beige cloth bag with tense and calculated movements. Inside the bag, muffled cries of newborns echo through the cold wind, creating a symphony of despair that only he can hear. The man nervously looks around, making sure he's alone, before lifting the bag over the bridge's parapet. When he drops the bag into the turbulent waters, believing he has solved his problem, a majestic white horse that was watching the entire scene makes a decision that will change everything. Before we begin, if you love animals as much as we do, make sure you subscribe to our channel so you don't miss any of our heartwarming stories. Thanks. Now, back to our story. The grey afternoon hung over the rural landscape like a damp blanket, and a cold wind cut through the air with a cruel precision that made even the sturdiest trees bow their heads in submission. Edward Sinclair adjusted the collar of his dark blue suit, an Italian piece that had cost more than most families would make in a year. His hands, always so steady in multi-million-dollar negotiations, trembled imperceptibly as he clutched the beige burlap sack against his chest. The river raged below the century-old stone bridge, its turbulent waters reflecting the heavy sky, which threatened to unleash its fury upon the land. Edward had chosen this spot precisely for its sinister reputation. Many said the waters of Shadow Creek were treacherous, capable of dragging anything to the depths without a trace. Inside the sack, he pressed against his body. Two muffled cries echoed like a symphony of despair only he could hear. The sound pierced his eardrums and sent waves of guilt down his spine. But Edward forced himself to think of his wife, Isabel, and the financial empire he had built over 2 decades of relentless work. I can't let two creatures destroy everything I've fought for, he muttered to himself, the words carried away by the wind like dry autumn leaves. His dilated pupils revealed a toxic mix of desperation and determination as he glanced nervously around, making sure he was completely alone on that desolate afternoon. The pregnancy of Mariah, his former employee, had been an unwanted accident he had tried to resolve discreetly with money and empty promises. When she died in childbirth, Edward thought his problems were buried with her, but the twins had survived, and now they were time bombs that could detonate his perfect life at any moment. Isabel would never forgive a betrayal, especially one that resulted in illegitimate children. Their marriage had been arranged by powerful families, a strategic union that had multiplied their fortunes and social influence. The babies were not just evidence of his infidelity, they were living proof that he had broken the unspoken agreement of absolute discretion that kept his world intact. Edward approached the bridge's parapet, the cold wind hitting his face like invisible slaps. The sack in his hands felt as if it weighed a ton, though he knew the 2 newborns didn't even weigh 10 pounds together. They were small, fragile, completely dependent on a care he couldn't provide without destroying everything he had built. "Forgive me," he whispered, more to himself than to the whimpering children inside the damp fabric. "You should never have been born. There is no place for you in my world." What Edward didn't realize, as he slowly lifted the sack over the bridge's railing, was that he was not as alone as he imagined. On the opposite bank of the river, a majestic white horse had paused its daily stroll to watch the scene unfolding on the stone structure. The animal, its immaculate coat a stark contrast to the grim landscape, fixed its intelligent eyes on the man in the elegant suit. There was something in the horse's demeanor that suggested more than simple animal curiosity. Its ears were alert, turned toward the bridge, and its tense muscles indicated it was ready to act. It was as if the animal instinctively understood the gravity of the moment, recognizing that a terrible injustice was about to be committed. Edward took a deep breath, closed his eyes for a moment, and in a quick, decisive motion, he let the sack drop into the turbulent waters. The impact on the river's surface produced a sound that echoed through the landscape like a gunshot. and he immediately stepped back from the parapet, trying not to hear the cries that still seemed to reverberate in his ears. But the white horse was already in motion. The white horse shot toward the riverbank with a speed that defied its majestic proportions. Its hooves hammered against the damp earth, producing a frantic rhythm that echoed through the landscape like the beats of a desperate heart. The animal had witnessed the exact moment the sack hit the water, and now every second was crucial to prevent an irreversible tragedy. Edward, still standing on the bridge, watched in growing disbelief as he realized the horse was heading directly for the spot where the sack had vanished into the turbulent waters. His legs began to tremble, not just from the biting cold, but from the terrifying realization that there had been a witness to his actions, a witness that, apparently, had no intention of remaining passive. "Damn animal," he muttered through gritted teeth, gripping the parapet hard enough to turn his knuckles white. "Go back where you came from and forget what you saw." But the white horse had already reached the river's edge and, without hesitation, plunged into the icy water. The impact of its body against the surface created waves that spread in concentric circles as its head momentarily disappeared beneath the current. Edward's stomach churned as he saw the animal emerge, fighting against the force of the water that tried to drag it downstream. The scene unfolding before him was both majestic and terrifying. The horse swam with an almost human determination, its flared nostrils sucking in air in desperate bursts, while its dark eyes scanned the water's surface. It was as if the animal possessed a higher intelligence, allowing it to understand exactly what it was looking for and why its search was so urgent. Inside the slowly sinking sack, the two babies continued to cry, their tiny lungs struggling against the soaked fabric that enveloped them. The burlap, which had initially floated for a few seconds, began to absorb the cold river water, increasing its weight and accelerating its descent toward the rocky riverbed. But the newborns showed extraordinary resistance, refusing to surrender silently to the fate that had been forced upon them. The horse dove again, this time staying submerged for long seconds that felt like an eternity to Edward, who watched with a mixture of horror and fascination. When the animal finally resurfaced, it had managed to grab a corner of the sack with its teeth, but the strong current made it impossible to maintain a firm grip while swimming. "No, no, no," Edward repeated like a desperate mantra, beginning to pace back and forth on the bridge. His calculating mind, trained to find solutions in corporate crises, now worked frantically to find a way to stop his decision from being reversed by an animal that seemed determined to save those two lives. The white horse made a third attempt, this time approaching the sack from a different angle. Its movements in the water were more coordinated now, as if it had learned to work with the current instead of against it. It managed to firmly grasp a larger section of the fabric and, with powerful strokes of its legs, began to swim toward the nearest bank. Edward realized his only chance to keep his secret was to get down from the bridge and try to intervene directly. But something deep inside him, a voice he had silenced long ago, whispered that perhaps this animal was doing what was right, while he had done something terrible and irreversible. His hands trembled not only from the cold, but from a guilt that was beginning to seep through the rational defenses he had built around his conscience. The horse was winning its battle against the river, slowly approaching the bank with its precious cargo. Inside the torn sack, two pairs of small, bright eyes opened for the first time since birth, as if they instinctively knew that their salvation was arriving through the courage and determination of an unexpected guardian. The grey afternoon was witnessing a miracle in progress. The white horse finally reached the bank, its hooves touching the rocky bottom of the river as it dragged the soaked sack onto dry land. Its flanks rose and fell rapidly, steam puffing from its nostrils like small clouds in the cold afternoon air. The animal carefully deposited its burden on a patch of dry grass, stepping back just enough to examine what it had rescued from the treacherous waters. The burlap sack was torn in several places, allowing small arms and legs to move feebly through the openings. The two babies were alive, but their skin had taken on a worrying bluish tint from the hypothermia that had rapidly set in. Their cries, once vigorous and protesting, were now reduced to weak whimpers that could barely be heard over the sound of the wind blowing through the trees. The white horse, moved by a protective instinct that defied any scientific explanation, positioned itself beside the newborns and began to warm them with its own body heat. Its nostrils blew warm air onto their small faces, while its hooves scraped nervously against the ground, as if the animal understood the urgency of the situation and knew it needed human help to save these two fragile lives. From the bridge, Edward watched the scene with a mixture of horror and disbelief. His carefully calculated plans had been completely foiled by an animal that demonstrated more compassion and courage than he himself had managed to muster. The sight of the babies, still alive, protected by a horse that refused to abandon them, sent waves of guilt through his conscience that he desperately tried to suppress. "This can't be happening," he muttered to himself, his words swallowed by the wind. They can't survive this." But the white horse had other plans. Raising its majestic head toward the grey sky, the animal began to neigh with an intensity and urgency that echoed through the rural landscape like a cry for help. Its neighs were not random. There was a pattern, a repetition that suggested the horse was deliberately calling for help, as if it knew there were people nearby who could hear its plea. Less than a mile away, in a small wooden house with a flower garden that contrasted with the gloomy afternoon, Helen Rogers paused her evening ritual of preparing tea when she heard the desperate neighs cutting through the air. At 70, the retired nurse had developed a keen ear for sounds of distress, a skill honed over 4 decades of saving lives in rural and urban hospitals. "That's not a normal whinny," she murmured, setting her porcelain cup on the table and walking to the window that faced the river. Helen had cared for people and animals long enough to recognize when someone was calling for help, regardless of the species making the sound. Her grey hair was tied in a simple bun, and her hands, still steady despite her age, trembled slightly as she grabbed her woolen coat from a hook behind the door. Helen had lost her husband 2 years prior, and since then, her house had become too quiet, filled only with the memories of a life dedicated to caring for others. Those urgent neighs awakened a purpose in her that had lain dormant with her loneliness. The horse continued to cry for help, alternating between loud neighs and protective movements around the babies who were fighting hypothermia. The animal seemed to understand that every minute was precious, that these 2 tiny lives depended on medical care it could not provide. No matter how strong its determination to protect them, Helen grabbed her medical bag, a habit she had kept even in retirement, and left the house with determined steps toward the river. Her decades of medical experience had taught her that when life calls for help, there is no time to waste on hesitation or doubt. Something or someone urgently needed her care, and she would not fail to answer that call. Edward, still watching from the bridge, felt his heart race when he saw a figure approaching on the path leading to the river. Helen walked down the steep path to the river with the determination of someone who had spent a lifetime racing against time to save lives. Her firm steps contrasted with her advanced age, and the medical bag swung rhythmically by her side, a reminder of the countless emergencies she had faced over 4 decades. The horse's neighs grew clearer and more urgent with every yard she covered. When she finally saw the scene unfolding on the riverbank, Helen felt her heart quicken in a way it hadn't in years. The majestic white horse stood like a protective guardian over something she couldn't yet distinguish clearly, but her medical instincts had already detected a life-and-death emergency. "My God," she murmured, as she got close enough to see the 2 small bodies the horse was so zealously protecting. "Babies! They're babies!" The horse raised its noble head toward Helen, and for a moment their eyes met in a silent but profound communication. It was as if the animal was saying, "Finally, someone who can help has arrived. I've done my part. Now it's your turn." The horse moved back just a few steps, allowing Helen to approach, but it remained vigilant, ready to intervene if necessary. Helen knelt on the damp grass, her medical training taking complete control of her actions. The babies were in a critical state of hypothermia, their bluish skin and weak breaths indicating that every second was precious. She opened her medical bag with precise, efficient movements, pulling out an emergency thermal blanket she always carried. "You two are going to be okay," she whispered in the maternal voice that had comforted hundreds of patients over the years. "Aunt Helen is here now, and I won't let anything happen to you." The twins seemed to respond to her gentle voice and the expert care of her hands. One of them opened his eyes for the first time since the rescue, revealing bright blue irises that shone with a surprising vitality, considering the trauma he had endured. The other baby feebly moved her tiny fingers, as if trying to cling to life with all the strength she could muster. Helen worked quickly, wrapping the newborns in the thermal blanket and checking their vital signs with the dexterity of decades of practice. Their heartbeats were irregular but steady, and their breathing, though shallow, showed signs of gradual improvement. What impressed her was the extraordinary resilience these two small beings displayed. It was as if they possessed a will to live that defied all odds. "How did you get here?" she asked aloud, examining the torn, soaked burlap sack beside them. The obvious answer was too disturbing to accept easily. Someone had tried to dispose of these babies in the cruelest way possible, but by some miracle, they had found an unlikely savior in a courageous horse. The white horse approached again, gently sniffing the babies as if checking on their progress. Helen watched in fascination as the animal seemed to understand exactly what was happening, demonstrating an intelligence and sensitivity that transcended any animal behavior she had ever witnessed. "You saved them, didn't you?" she said to the horse, extending a hand to gently touch its muzzle. "You saw what someone tried to do, and you wouldn't let it happen." Edward, still watching from the bridge, felt his blood run cold as he saw the nurse expertly tending to the babies. His mind raced, calculating the implications of this discovery. If the babies survived, if someone investigated their origins, his entire carefully constructed world would collapse like a house of cards in a storm. Helen looked up toward the bridge, noticing a lone silhouette observing the scene. For a moment, their gazes met across the distance, and she felt a chill run down her spine. There was something unsettling in the way the figure stood motionless, watching, making no move to help or approach. "Who's there?" she murmured, instinctively shielding the babies against her chest. Edward flinched when he realized the woman had noticed his presence on the bridge. His heart hammered against his ribs like a desperate bird trying to escape a cage, and his palms sweated despite the biting cold. The last thing he needed was a witness who could connect him to those babies, especially one who seemed to have enough medical knowledge to keep them alive. "I have to get out of here," he muttered through clenched teeth, turning abruptly and walking toward the luxury car he had parked at the end of the bridge. Each step echoed against the ancient stones with a hollow sound that seemed to announce his guilt to the entire universe. Edward forced himself to maintain a normal pace, resisting the urge to run, knowing that any suspicious behavior could draw even more attention. Meanwhile, Helen focused all her attention on the babies, who were now breathing more regularly in her arms. The thermal blanket was doing its job, and the bluish tint of their skin was gradually giving way to healthier pink tones. The twins seemed to respond positively to her care, as if they instinctively recognized they were finally in safe, competent hands. "We need to get them somewhere warm and safe," she said to the horse, which continued to stand guard beside her. "My house isn't far, and I have all the equipment I need to care for them properly." The white horse seemed to understand her words, positioning itself to make transporting the babies easier. Helen was amazed by the animal's intelligence. It was as if it knew exactly what needed to be done and was willing to cooperate completely to ensure the safety of the newborns it had rescued. The walk back to her house was careful and deliberate. Helen held the babies tightly against her chest, shielding them from the cold wind that still cut through the air with cruel intensity. The horse accompanied her the entire way, walking by her side like a silent guardian, constantly checking to ensure its small charges were well protected. When they reached the wooden house with its flower garden, Helen felt a wave of relief she hadn't experienced in years. This home, which had become too quiet after her husband's death, would now be filled again with the sound of young lives needing care and protection. It was as if fate had sent these babies to give new purpose to her existence. Helen's kitchen was quickly transformed into a makeshift intensive care unit. She placed the babies in a padded basket near the wood-burning stove, which radiated a constant, comforting warmth. Her experienced hands worked with the precision of decades of medical practice, rechecking vital signs, carefully cleaning the small bodies and assessing for any signs of trauma or injury. "You are fighters," she murmured with admiration, watching as the twins moved and reacted to her care. "You survived something that should have been impossible to overcome." The white horse remained outside the kitchen window, like a dedicated sentinel refusing to abandon its post. Helen could see it through the lace curtains, its majestic silhouette outlined against the darkening sky. The animal clearly had no intention of leaving. It had taken responsibility for these two lives and intended to see it through to the end. As she prepared a special nutritional solution for newborns, Helen couldn't stop thinking about the solitary figure she had seen watching from the bridge. There was something deeply unsettling about the way that man had stood motionless, making no move to help or investigate. It was as if he knew exactly what was happening and wanted no part of it. "Who would do such a thing to innocent babies?" she asked aloud, her words echoing through the warm kitchen. "And why would someone be watching instead of helping?" The twins seemed to react to her voice, turning their small faces toward the sound, like sunflowers following the sun. Helen noticed they shared a special connection. When one cried, the other responded immediately, as if they shared a secret language only they understood. Outside, the white horse neighed softly, a sound that seemed to carry both a promise and a warning. The first week for the babies at Helen's house unfolded like a delicate dance between life and death, where each small progress was celebrated as a monumental victory. The twins showed a resilience that defied all the medical expectations Helen had developed throughout her career. It was as if they possessed an inner life force that refused to be extinguished, no matter how adverse the circumstances. Helen established a rigorous care routine that included feeding every 2 hours, constant monitoring of their body temperature, and regular sessions of tactile stimulation to strengthen their tiny nervous systems. Her experienced hands worked with the delicacy of an artisan, each movement calculated to provide maximum comfort and security for the newborns who had arrived in her life so dramatically. The white horse never abandoned its post as guardian. During the day, it grazed peacefully in Helen's garden, always positioned to have a clear view of the kitchen window where the babies rested. During the cold nights, it would stand close to the house's outer wall, as if its own body heat could somehow pass through the wooden planks and provide additional protection for the small lives under its watch. "You're an angel in a horse's disguise," Helen would murmur each morning as she fed it oats and sugar, watching how it carefully checked on the babies before accepting any food for itself. The animal's dedication was something that transcended any natural behavior she had ever witnessed. As if it understood it had undertaken a sacred responsibility. The twins began to show distinct personalities during that first week. The boy, whom Helen had decided to temporarily name Gabriel, showed a keen curiosity, his blue eyes following every movement around him with an intensity surprising for one so young. The girl, whom she named Hope, was quieter, but demonstrated an extraordinary sensitivity to the emotions of those around her, as if she could feel the love and care Helen poured over them. A fascinating discovery emerged in the first few days. The babies seemed to have a telepathic connection. When separated by more than a few feet, they would both start crying simultaneously, only calming down when they were brought back together. It was as if they shared not just a genetic bond, but a spiritual link that kept them inexplicably connected. Helen began to face the dilemma she knew would eventually come: what to do officially with the two children. Technically, she should report the discovery of the babies to the authorities, but something in her heart made her hesitate. The local Child Protective Services system was overwhelmed, and she feared Gabriel and Hope would be separated or placed in an institution where they wouldn't receive the specialized care they needed. "Maybe it's better to wait a few more days," she would mutter to herself, watching the twins sleep peacefully in their makeshift cribs, "until they're stronger, more stable." The truth was, Helen had fallen completely in love with these two little souls. After 2 years of suffocating loneliness, they had brought light and purpose back into her existence. Her house, which once echoed only with memories of the past, now vibrated with the energy of new life and the infinite possibilities the future might hold. During the nights, as she cared for the crying babies, Helen found herself reflecting on the mysterious man she had seen on the bridge. Her suspicions grew with each passing day that no one came looking for missing babies. It was as if Gabriel and Hope didn't officially exist, as if someone had deliberately erased all traces of their existence. "Who are you?" she would whisper as she rocked them in the silent pre-dawn hours. "Where did you come from, and who brought you to that river?" The white horse seemed to share her concerns, showing increasing agitation whenever strangers approached the property. The second week brought a discovery that would completely change the course of Gabriel and Hope's story. Helen had decided to make a few discreet calls to former nursing colleagues in the area, trying to find out if there were any records of recently born babies who might have been reported missing. What she discovered chilled her to the bone. There have been no official reports of missing babies in the entire region, reported Carmen, an experienced midwife who had worked at the county hospital for over 30 years. "It's strange, Helen. If someone had lost twins, the whole community would be mobilized looking for them." This revelation hit Helen like a punch to the gut. It meant that someone had deliberately kept Gabriel and Hope's existence an absolute secret, and that their abandonment in the river had not been an act of desperation, but a calculated decision to make them simply disappear from the world without a trace. Meanwhile, Edward was battling nightmares that had tormented him every night since that afternoon on the bridge. Images of the white horse emerging from the water with the sack in its teeth replayed obsessively in his mind, mixed with visions of the crying babies and the woman who had found them. His wife, Isabel, had begun to comment on his restless nights and increasingly paranoid behavior. "You're different, Edward," she said over breakfast in their elegant mansion, watching him nervously stir his untouched coffee. "Something's bothering you, and I want to know what it is." Edward forced a smile that didn't reach his eyes, his hands trembling imperceptibly as he held the fine porcelain cup. "It's just business problems, my dear. Nothing for you to worry about." But the truth was, Edward couldn't stop thinking about the babies. With each day that passed without news of bodies being found in the river, his paranoia grew exponentially. There was something unsettling about how that horse had acted, as if it possessed an almost human intelligence and a determination that transcended any normal animal behavior. The unexpected twist came when Edward, consumed by the need to know if his problem had truly been resolved, decided to return to the area of the bridge to investigate discreetly. He hired private investigators, claiming he was scouting for a rural property investment, but in reality, he wanted to find out if there was any evidence that the babies had survived. And there's a retired nurse who lives near the river, one of the investigators reported during a meeting in his sleek downtown office. Helen Rogers, 70, widowed 2 years ago, lives alone in a small house, but lately, neighbors have noticed unusual activity. Edward's blood turned to ice when he heard these words. What kind of unusual activity? Well, there's a white horse that showed up on her property about 2 weeks ago and has refused to leave. And some neighbors have commented they've heard babies crying from her house, which is strange since she lives alone and has no close family. Edward felt as if the floor had disappeared from under his feet. His worst fears were being confirmed. The babies had not only survived, but they were being cared for by someone who might eventually uncover their true origins. His calculating mind immediately began to work on solutions for this problem that refused to go away. "I want you to investigate this woman more deeply," he ordered in a voice that tried to sound casual, but carried an unmistakable tension. "Find out everything about her, her routine, her connections, and do it discreetly." That same afternoon, as Helen lovingly cared for Gabriel and Hope, the white horse showed unusual agitation. Its ears were constantly alert, turned toward the road leading to the property, and it paced nervously through the garden as if sensing an approaching threat. Helen noticed the animal's restlessness and felt a chill run down her spine. During her long medical career, she had learned to trust her instincts, both her own and those of other beings who showed special sensitivity. The horse was trying to warn her of some imminent danger. "What is it, my angel?" she asked, approaching him and gently stroking his neck. "What are you sensing?" Helen's suspicions about the baby's mysterious origin were about to turn into a reality far more sinister than she could have imagined. The third week began with a sense of menace hanging in the air, like a storm cloud about to unleash its fury. Helen had noticed strange movements around her property, cars slowing down more than usual on the rural road, distant figures who seemed to be watching her house through binoculars, and a constant feeling of being watched that made her look over her shoulder with every step. The white horse had become even more protective, strategically positioning itself between the house and any external approach. Its keen instincts detected human presence long before Helen could, and its agitated behavior served as an early warning system that kept her constantly vigilant. Gabriel and Hope, now stronger and more alert, seemed to sense the growing tension in the environment. They cried more frequently when strangers approached the property, as if their special connection to each other also extended to a heightened sensitivity to danger. Helen watched in fascination as the twins reacted instantly to changes in the horse's behavior, creating a natural protection network that deeply impressed her. Edward, consumed by paranoia and the fear that his carefully constructed life would crumble, had intensified surveillance on Helen and the babies. His private investigators reported every movement, every visitor, every detail of the retired nurse's daily routine. What they discovered only increased his certainty that the babies under her care were Gabriel and Hope. "She doesn't get many visitors," the lead investigator reported during a tense meeting in Edward's office. "But there's something peculiar. She's been making some calls to old nursing colleagues, asking about missing babies. It's like she's investigating the children's origin." Edward felt cold sweat trickle down his back. The woman wasn't just caring for the babies. She was actively trying to find out where they came from. If she connected the dots, if she found out about Mariah and her connection to him, his entire financial and social empire would collapse. "But we need to accelerate our investigation of her," he said in a controlled voice that masked his growing desperation. "I want to know everything, her background, her family, her vulnerabilities, and I want it by the end of the week." Meanwhile, Helen had made a decision that would dramatically change the course of events. Her sister Beatrice, an experienced midwife living in the next town, had accepted her invitation for a visit. Helen needed someone she trusted completely to help her understand the complex situation she found herself in with Gabriel and Hope. Beatrice arrived on a sunny afternoon that contrasted sharply with the tense atmosphere that had dominated the region in recent days. She was a woman of 65, with completely white hair and shrewd eyes that reflected decades of experience helping bring life into the world. Her reputation as a midwife was legendary in the area, and she had a network of contacts that spanned several rural towns. "These babies are special," Beatrice said, after carefully examining Gabriel and Hope. "There's something about them that transcends the normal. The way they connect with each other, the resilience they've shown, the way they respond to their environment. I've never seen anything like it in 40 years. Helen shared her suspicions about the twins' mysterious origins, including the complete absence of official records of their birth or disappearance. Beatrice listened attentively, occasionally asking specific questions that revealed her experience with complicated situations involving unwanted babies or problematic births. "I've seen cases like this before," Beatrice said thoughtfully, watching as the white horse positioned itself near the kitchen window. "Powerful men trying to make problems disappear, women who die in childbirth, leaving behind inconvenient evidence. But I've never seen a situation where the babies themselves showed such a will to survive." The conversation was interrupted when the white horse began to show extreme agitation, pacing nervously in the garden and staring fixedly toward the road. Its flared nostrils and alert ears indicated it had detected something it considered a threat. "Someone's coming," Helen whispered, picking up Gabriel, while Beatrice did the same with Hope. The car approaching on the dirt road kicked up a cloud of dust that rose against the blue afternoon sky like an alarm signal. Helen and Beatrice watched from the window, holding the babies close, while the white horse positioned itself between the house and the unknown vehicle with the determination of a soldier defending sacred ground. "I don't recognize that car," Helen murmured, her heart racing. "And no one should know I'm caring for babies here." Beatrice narrowed her eyes, her decades of experience dealing with delicate situations kicking in. "Helen, I need you to tell me exactly how you found these children, every detail, even the ones that seem insignificant." As Helen recounted the story of the rescue by the white horse, Beatrice processed every piece of information with the analytical mind of someone who had seen many dark family secrets over her career. The narrative of the elegant man watching from the bridge, combined with the complete absence of official records for the babies, painted a disturbing picture she recognized from similar situations. The car stopped at the edge of the property, but no one got out immediately. The occupants seemed to be observing the house, assessing the situation before taking any action. The white horse showed increasing agitation, its muscles tense and ready to act if necessary. "These children belonged to someone powerful," Beatrice said with absolute certainty. "Someone with the resources to hire investigators and who considers these babies a significant enough threat to warrant drastic action." Gabriel and Hope seemed to sense the imminent danger, crying simultaneously in a way Helen had never heard before. They were not cries of hunger or discomfort, but a kind of primitive wail that seemed to express instinctive fear. The sound hit the white horse like a distress call, causing it to neigh loudly and begin pacing agitatedly between the house and the strange car. "We have to protect them," Helen said with a determination that surprised even herself. "No matter who it is or what they want, these children almost died once, and I won't let it happen again." Beatrice nodded, her mind already formulating a plan based on decades of experience protecting mothers and babies in dangerous situations. "I have contacts all over the region, other midwives, retired nurses, rural doctors, people who have dedicated their lives to protecting the vulnerable. If these children need protection, we can create a network that will be impossible to break." The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the afternoon air, followed by male voices conversing in low but urgent tones. Helen could make out words like confirmation, evidence, and report, which strengthened her certainty that this was no casual or coincidental visit. Stay here with the babies, Beatrice whispered, heading for the front door with the courage of someone who had faced many difficult situations. I'll see what these people want. Helen watched through the window as her sister walked toward the two men in dark suits who were approaching the house. The white horse immediately positioned itself beside Beatrice, as if recognizing she was on the right side of the unfolding battle. "Good afternoon," Beatrice said with a firm, authoritative voice. "Can I help you? This is private property." One of the men, clearly the leader, smiled in a way that didn't reach his eyes. "We're private investigators, ma'am. We're looking for information about unusual activity in the area. We heard the lady who lives here may have found some abandoned children." Beatrice crossed her arms, her posture radiating the authority of decades of caring for families in crisis. "And who exactly is asking? What's your interest in abandoned children?" The second investigator took a step forward, but stopped abruptly when the white horse blocked his path, displaying a controlled aggression that made it clear any hostile move would be met with proportional force. "We represent a client with a legitimate interest in locating certain children," the first man said, his patience clearly wearing thin. "It would be better for everyone involved if we could resolve this amicably." Beatrice smiled, but there was steel in her expression. "And it would be better for you if you knew that this region is full of people who have dedicated their lives to protecting vulnerable children. People who won't hesitate to mobilize the entire community if they detect any threat to the well-being of innocents." The tension in the air became almost palpable as everyone involved understood that a line had been drawn in the sand. The investigators retreated in the face of Beatrice's unwavering determination and the intimidating presence of the white horse. But their calculating eyes indicated they would not give up easily. After exchanging a few words in low, threatening tones, they returned to their car and left, leaving only the implicit promise that they would be back with a different approach. "They'll be back," Beatrice said, as soon as the car disappeared down the dusty road. "And next time, they won't just be asking questions." Helen came out of the house carrying Gabriel and Hope, her face pale but resolute. The confrontation she had witnessed through the window confirmed her worst fears about the dangerous situation they were in. The babies were not just abandoned orphans, they were living evidence of something a powerful man was desperate to hide. "Beatrice, I need to know something," Helen said, looking directly into her sister's eyes. "Did you recognize anything about those men, the way they spoke, the questions they asked?" Beatrice nodded gravely, her decades of experience finally fitting the pieces of a dark puzzle together. "Helen, 20 years ago, I attended a young woman named Mariah. She worked for a wealthy family in the city. She got pregnant, but the father of the children, well, let's just say he was a man who couldn't afford complications in his perfect life." Helen's blood ran cold when she heard this. What happened to her? Mariah died in childbirth. Twins. It was a difficult, complicated birth, and she didn't make it, but the children survived. Beatrice paused meaningfully. "At least, that's what I was told at the time. I never heard about the babies again." Helen felt as if all the pieces of a gruesome puzzle were finally falling into place. "Do you think Gabriel and Hope are Mariah's children?" Beatrice completed with absolute certainty. "And if I'm right about who the father is, then these children are in far greater danger than we imagined." That same afternoon, Beatrice put the protection network she had promised into action. Through decades of professional relationships, she contacted midwives, retired nurses, rural doctors, and other healthcare professionals throughout the region. Within hours, an informal but powerful alliance was being formed with a single objective: to protect Gabriel and Hope. The first to answer the call was Carmen Oliver, a retired nurse who had worked in the same hospital as Helen for 15 years. She arrived at dusk, bringing medical supplies and a fierce determination that rivaled that of the White Horse itself. "I heard you have 2 little miracles who need protection," Carmen said, hugging Helen tightly before turning immediately to the babies. Tell me everything I need to know." As Helen and Beatrice relayed all the details of the rescue and the subsequent threats, other women began to arrive. Rose Sanders, a 60-year-old midwife who had helped bring over 1,000 babies into the world. Mary Fernandez, a retired rural doctor who had dedicated her career to serving underprivileged families. Ana Torres, an obstetric nurse who still had contacts in every hospital in the region. "And this is a situation we've all faced in one way or another," Rose said, watching as Gabriel and Hope responded positively to the presence of so many experienced caregivers. Powerful men trying to hide inconvenient evidence, babies who become victims of political and social games. The White Horse seemed to approve of the Allies' arrival, showing a calm it hadn't displayed in days. It was as if it recognized that it had finally assembled a group of guardians worthy of the trust it had placed in Helen when it brought the babies to her home. Ana Torres, with her expertise in hospital records, offered a crucial contribution. "I can discreetly investigate the birth records from the last few months. If these babies are Mariah's children, there must be some official document, even if it's been buried or falsified." Mary Fernandez took on the responsibility of creating an emergency evacuation plan. "If the situation becomes untenable here, we have a network of safe houses throughout the region. We can move the children quickly if necessary." Beatrice coordinated all actions with the efficiency of an experienced general. "We need concrete evidence about who is behind this threat. We can't defend ourselves effectively if we don't know exactly who we're up against." As night fell, Helen's house had transformed into the command center of a protection operation that ran with the precision of decades of collective experience. The women took turns caring for Gabriel and Hope while maintaining constant surveillance on any suspicious activity in the area. The White Horse took up its nightly post, but now it was not alone in its guard. It had found a family of warriors willing to fight for the lives of the two small souls that fate had placed under its protection. The fourth week arrived, heavy with tension and discoveries that completely changed the landscape of the situation. Ana Torres had worked tirelessly for 3 days, using her hospital contacts to track down records that should have existed but seemed to have been carefully erased or altered. Her persistence finally paid off when she uncovered documents buried in the archives of a private hospital in the state capital. "I found it," Ana announced on a rainy morning, walking into Helen's house with a folder full of papers and a look of grim victory. Mariah Cole, 26, died during the birth of twins exactly 1 month ago. The babies were registered as live births, but all subsequent documents regarding their fate were removed or falsified. The women gathered around the kitchen table while Gabriel and Hope slept peacefully in their makeshift cribs, oblivious to the fact that their true origins were finally being discovered. The White Horse stood near the window, as if it understood the gravity of this moment of revelation. "There's more," Ana continued, pulling a photograph from the folder. "Mariah worked for Sinclair Holdings, owned by Edward Sinclair, one of the wealthiest and most influential men in the state." Helen felt as if she'd been punched in the gut. Edward Sinclair was a name known to everyone in the region. His companies employed hundreds, and his political influence stretched across several counties. He was exactly the kind of man who would have the resources and motivation to make problem babies disappear permanently. "Edward Sinclair is married to Isabel Mendonça," added Rose, who knew the powerful families of the region well from her long career as a midwife. An arranged marriage between two influential families, if it got out that he had children out of wedlock, it would be the end of everything for him. Beatrice finished. His reputation, his businesses, his social standing. Men like Edward would kill to protect secrets like that. Mary Fernandez had been investigating from another angle, using her medical contacts to find out more about the circumstances of Mariah's death. "I managed to speak with the nurse who was present at the birth. Mariah mentioned the father's name before she died, but she was instructed to maintain absolute secrecy. The final piece came from Carmen, who had used her connections to discreetly access financial records. Edward made a series of substantial payments to Mariah during her pregnancy. After her death, there were transfers to a consulting firm known for handling delicate problems for wealthy clients. The puzzle was complete. Edward Sinclair was the father of Gabriel and Hope, and he had tried to murder them to protect his secrets. The only thing that had prevented his terrible plan from succeeding was the courageous intervention of a white horse that refused to let such a cruel injustice be carried out. Now that we know the truth, what do we do? Helen asked, looking at the two small lives sleeping peacefully, unaware that they were heirs to a fortune built by a man who had tried to kill them. We document everything, Anna said with determination. Every piece of evidence, every connection, every attempt to cover up the truth. Edward Sinclair may have power and money, but we have something stronger, the truth, and the will to fight for it. Beatrice took command of the operation with the efficiency of decades of crisis management experience. We need copies of all these documents stored in safe places. If something happens to one of us, the others must be prepared to carry on. The white horse neighed softly outside, as if approving of the course of action being planned. For a whole month, he had protected Gabriel and Hope against all threats, and now he finally had human allies worthy of his trust and determination. While the women meticulously organized the evidence that could bring down one of the most powerful men in the region, Edward was in his luxurious office, receiving his investigators' report on the problematic situation at Helen's house. The woman isn't alone, the lead investigator informed him. No, there's a whole network of retired nurses and midwives taking turns caring for the children. And there's more, they're asking questions, digging into hospital records. Edward felt the blood run cold in his veins. His worst predictions were coming true. Not only had the babies survived, but now competent and determined people were trying to uncover the truth about their origins. How long until they connect it all to me? He asked in a voice that struggled for control. Days, maybe, a week, tops. Edward understood that the time had come for drastic measures. The confrontation everyone feared arrived on a Friday morning, just as the sun was rising and fog still clung to the fields surrounding Helen's house. Edward Sinclair appeared in person, driving his luxury car down the dirt road with a desperate determination that had consumed him during sleepless nights of mounting paranoia. He did not come alone. 3 men in suits accompanied him, carrying briefcases and an arrogance that reflected the power and influence of their employer. Edward had decided to abandon subterfuge and directly confront what he considered the last obstacle between him and the preservation of his empire. The white horse sensed the approach long before the cars were visible, beginning to show an agitation Helen had never witnessed. Its urgent neighs woke the entire house, alerting the 5 women who took turns in constant protection of Gabriel and Hope. It was as if the animal recognized the scent and presence of the man who had tried to drown the babies a month earlier. "He's here," Helen said, watching from the window as she held Gabriel to her chest. "The man from the bridge. I recognize his posture, the way he moves." Beatrice took command of the situation with the calm of decades facing medical emergencies. "Anna, you and Mary take the babies to the back room. Rose and Carmen, get the evidence we've collected ready. Helen, you're with me. It's time to face this man." Edward approached the house with calculated steps, his expression masking the desperation he felt inside. He wore his finest suit, as if an impeccable appearance could grant him moral authority in a situation where he had completely lost any right to claim it. "Mrs. Helen Rogers," he said, in a voice that tried to sound cordial but carried a thinly veiled threat. "I'm Edward Sinclair, and I believe you are caring for something that belongs to me." Helen stepped out of the house, flanked by Beatrice, while the white horse positioned itself between them and Edward like a living shield. The animal's proximity clearly unnerved Edward, who vividly remembered how this same horse had thwarted his terrible plans on the bridge. I don't know what you're talking about, Helen replied, with a firmness that surprised even herself. This is my property, and any children under my care are here out of medical and humanitarian need. Edward laughed, but the sound carried no humor, only a desperate bitterness. Let's stop playing games, Mom. I know you rescued 2 babies from the river a month ago, babies that were put there by mistake. By mistake, Beatrice repeated, her voice laced with controlled outrage. Is trying to drown 2 newborns a mistake? Edward's mask of cordiality finally crumbled completely. You don't understand the situation. These babies represent the destruction of everything I've worked for. My marriage, my company, my reputation. I cannot allow them to exist. But they do exist, Helen said with unshakable conviction. Gabriel and Hope are human beings with a right to life, regardless of how inconvenient they are to your plans. Edward flinched slightly when he heard the names Helen had given the babies. The reality that they had become real people with identities and caregivers who loved them hit him like a punch to the gut. For a month, he had managed to convince himself he was dealing with abstract problems, not 2 human lives that had found protection and love. They are my children, he said in a broken voice. I have rights. Rights? Beatrice interrupted with controlled fury. What rights does someone who tried to murder his own children have? We have all the evidence. Edward, hospital records, financial transfers, witness statements. We know about Mariah Cole. We know about the payments. We know about the consulting firm you hired. Edward's face went pale as he understood that his secret was completely exposed. His legs trembled, and he grabbed the hood of his car to keep from falling. For weeks, he had lived with the hope that he could control the situation, but now he faced the devastating reality that he had lost completely. What do you want? He asked in a defeated voice. Justice, Helen answered simply. We want these babies to grow up safely, protected from any threat, and we want you to face the consequences of the choices you've made. The white horse approached Edward, fixing him with a gaze that seemed to carry the full moral weight of the universe. For a moment, man and animal stared at each other, and Edward finally understood the magnitude of his moral failure in the face of a creature that had shown more compassion and courage than he had managed to muster in his entire life. The silence that followed the confrontation was broken only by the soft sound of the wind in the trees and the calmer whinnies of the white horse, as if the animal understood the moment of greatest danger had finally passed. Edward remained leaning against his car, the weight of his terrible choices finally crashing down on him with the full force he had tried to avoid for an entire month. I'm not a monster, he murmured, more to himself than to the women who watched him with a mixture of compassion and determination. At least, I wasn't. I don't know how I got to this point. Helen took a step forward, her decades of experience caring for people in crisis overriding any impulse for judgment. Everyone makes mistakes, Edward. The difference is what we do after we recognize them. Ana Torres emerged from the house carrying a folder filled with meticulously organized documents. We have enough evidence to completely destroy your reputation and have you criminally charged. But we also have a proposal that might offer a different path. Edward looked up, a glimmer of hope mixed with fear shining in his exhausted expression. What kind of proposal? Beatrice took the floor, her voice carrying the authority of someone who had spent her life protecting what was right. Gabriel and Hope need security, education, medical care, and above all, love. Helen wants to officially adopt them, but that requires resources a retired nurse doesn't have. You will establish a comprehensive trust fund for the children, Rose continued. Full education, health care, everything they'll need until they're adults. In exchange, you will disappear from their lives forever. Edward processed the proposal, his mind still reeling from the collapse of his carefully laid plans. And if I refuse, then all the evidence we've collected will be turned over to the proper authorities. Anna said with absolute firmness, Attempted murder, document forgery, conspiracy. You'll spend the rest of your life in prison. And even then, you won't be able to stop these children from being raised by people who truly love them. Mary Fernandez added the final element of the proposal. There is also the matter of your wife. Isabel deserves to know the truth about who she really married. We can be discreet about that, or she can find out from the newspapers when the scandal breaks. Edward felt as if the world had completely shifted around him. For decades, he had built his life on control, power, and the ability to make problems disappear with money and influence. Now he faced a situation where none of that mattered, where only his moral choices would determine the outcome. Can I see them?" he asked in a barely audible voice. "Just once, to make sure they're really okay." Helen hesitated for a moment, silently consulting her companions with meaningful glances. Finally, she nodded, just to see them, nothing more. Edward was led into the living room, where Gabriel and Hope rested in their makeshift cribs. When he saw the two babies for the first time since that terrible afternoon on the bridge, something inside him definitively broke. They were perfect, healthy, clearly loved and well cared for. They weren't problems or obstacles. They were two precious human lives he had almost cowardly destroyed. "They look like Mariah," he whispered, tears rolling silently down his cheeks. "She was a good person. She deserved so much better than what I offered." The white horse appeared at the window, watching the scene intently. Edward turned to the animal that had thwarted his terrible plans, and for a moment their gazes met again. This time, there was no threat or fear, only a mutual recognition that the horse had done what was right when he himself had completely failed. "Thank you," Edward said to the horse, knowing it sounded absurd, but feeling the need to express his gratitude. "You saved them when I failed to be the father they should have had." 3 days later, all the legal documents were signed. A substantial trust fund had been established for Gabriel and Hope. Helen had begun the official adoption process, and Edward had quietly disappeared from the region. His company would continue to operate under new management, but he had chosen a voluntary exile that would allow him to try to rebuild some meaning in his life, far from the temptations of power and control. The network of courageous women that had formed to protect the babies remained active, evolving into a support system that would care for Gabriel and Hope throughout their childhood. They would grow up knowing they were loved not just by Helen, but by an entire community of dedicated guardians. 6 months had passed since that transformative morning when Edward finally faced the consequences of his actions. Helen's house had become a true home, filled with life, laughter, and the infectious energy of 2 children growing up surrounded by unconditional love and expert care. Gabriel and Hope, now 8 months old, were healthy, happy babies who showed an extraordinary vitality that impressed every healthcare professional who saw them. Helen found that late-in-life motherhood had brought a renewed purpose to her existence she had never imagined possible. At 70, she felt more energized and fulfilled than at any time since her husband's death. Gabriel, with his curious blue eyes and easy smile, showed early signs of a sharp intelligence that made him watch everything around him with fascination. Hope, with her more contemplative but equally alert nature, displayed an emotional sensitivity that made her especially responsive to the feelings of those close to her. The special connection between the twins had only strengthened over time. They played together in ways that transcended the typical development of babies their age, as if they shared a secret language only they fully understood. When one woke during the night, the other would invariably stir seconds later, and their simultaneous smiles when they saw Helen each morning melted any resistance she might have had against the maternal love that enveloped them. The white horse, whom everyone had decided to call Guardian, had become a permanent and beloved presence on the property. Helen had legally formalized her ownership of the animal, who showed an unwavering dedication to the 2 children he had saved. Guardian actively participated in the daily routine, positioning himself near the garden where the babies played on their colorful blankets, alerting them to any approaching strangers and demonstrating extraordinary gentleness whenever he interacted with Gabriel and Hope. The network of brave women that had formed during the crisis had evolved into something even more significant. Helen, Beatrice, Anna, Rose, Mary, and Carmen officially established the Gabriel and Hope Care Center, an organization dedicated to caring for infants and young children in vulnerable situations. The center operated out of Helen's expanded home, which had been renovated with funds from the trust Edward established to create a specialized and welcoming environment. I never imagined our fight to protect Gabriel and Hope would turn into something so much bigger, Beatrice said during a monthly center meeting, watching as the twins happily interacted with other children who were now also receiving specialized care. It's as if they were the catalyst for something the community has needed for a long time. Guardian had become the center's official therapy animal, demonstrating a remarkable ability to calm anxious children and provide emotional comfort to those who had experienced trauma. His majestic and gentle presence created an atmosphere of safety that benefited not only Gabriel and Hope, but all the children who found refuge at the center. Edward, strictly adhering to his agreement, had completely disappeared from the region. Occasional rumors suggested he was quietly working on social projects in a distant city, trying to find some form of redemption through service to others. He sent regular anonymous contributions to the center, but never attempted direct contact or claimed any rights to the children he had abandoned. The stone bridge, where it all began, had become a symbol of transformation for the entire community. Helen took Gabriel and Hope on weekly walks there, telling them the story of how a brave horse had changed their lives forever. The children, still too young to fully understand the narrative, always reacted with special fascination when they saw the place where their journeys truly began. You are miracles," Helen would whisper to them during these visits, while Guardian grazed peacefully near the bank of the river that had nearly become their grave. Miracles who taught us that it's never too late to start over, that love can overcome any adversity, and that sometimes our greatest mission in life appears when we least expect it. Gabriel and Hope grew up in an environment filled with love, security, and infinite possibilities. They would forever be remembered in the community as the children who turned a tragedy into a triumph, who united a group of extraordinary women on a mission of protection and care, and who proved that even in humanity's darkest moments, goodness and courage can prevail. The story of two babies saved by a brave horse had become a local legend of hope and redemption, inspiring others to believe that every life has infinite value and that it is never too late to choose to do what is right.